Hello, footy fans. Welcome to another OneSoccer Hangouts, one of the many shows on the OneSoccer YouTube channel. So we encourage you to stay inside and subscribe to watch one of the many shows we have here. Today, we have a special guest, Darren O'Dea, with 20 caps for Ireland. To start his career with Celtic, at a stint with TFC. So we'll definitely touch on that. And I'm joined once again by the usual suspects, Kurt Larson and Oliver Platt. I want to check in with everyone, see how everyone is doing. I got a text from a buddy today saying we're getting close to 50 days of isolation or quarantine. So I want to know how things have changed from the early days to now. Have your habits changed at all? I can definitely say that I am going out for less runs these days. I was going every other day to start, but that's dried up completely. Kurt, what's new with you?
Well, some positive news. I just found out today that although my driver's license is set to expire in July, I'm only a G2 driver. Complications from immigrating here, which I'm not happy about. Apparently, they're going to extend that, and they haven't determined how long it's going to be extended past your expiration date. So I was getting a little bit nervous about that. I have booked a driver's test for July 21st, though. So positive news. I don't really have to worry about that too much. It sounds like it's going to get extended.
Take positive stories right now.
Only cost $91. No big deal right now.
All right. Darren, how are things for you?
I'm more interested in that. Do you have to redo your driving test to renew it?
Well, Ontario has a tiered driver system, which I think is a complete load of crap. And apparently, if you come into the country and you can't prove you've been driving since you were 15 years old, you got to go through this tiered system. So unfortunately, I couldn't prove that I had been driving since I was 15 years old. So now I'm in this process of taking a few tests that I'm not happy about, obviously.
Well, but hang on, you've been here long enough now. Why haven't you gone through the tiers?
Doesn't matter. Because I can take my time doing the tiers. The tiers are still a pain.
Okay.
Yeah, not everyone's as lucky as you, Darren. Don't
That's
have
what
a driver when in the country.
But this is what doesn't make sense to me is I can, like, whether I have a G license or a G2 license, I don't know what difference does it make because I'm still driving the same amount on the same roads.
Yeah.
No idea.
Well, probably just get that sorted out then, Kurt.
There you go. I will. Very grumpy today.
Oh, we started out with positive news till we berated you with further questions and poked and prodded. Darren, just want to know what the latest is in Scotland. You're coaching the Celtic U-18 squad. How are things going over there as far as returning to action?
Well, at the minute, there's no real date as such, but certainly in the last week, there's been more talk of the prospect of coming out of lockdown. Football doesn't really fit into those conversations just yet. But the positive news is the kind of government, the messages getting are starting to put in place for what coming out of lockdown would look like. So I suppose that's as positive as you can get.
How are you kind of handling your players in a time like this? Because obviously they're at the age where maybe they're trying to push to become professional or already are and getting a bit anxious about having to sit out for a few months. How have you been kind of handling the squad?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd say probably 95% of our squad is professional.
Right.
Or signed the contracts. Now I won't go into it. There's a government scheme that's going on here, so some can't actually work at the minute. But previously to that, and certainly with the ones we can push, we've got WhatsApp group chats. There's conditioning programs put in, nutritional programs, psychological programs, and they're very much working day to day in the exact same schedule as they would, certainly physically, as if they were working with us. So they log all their stuff through different apps and then onto our own group chat. So they're still working, and the main thing is that we're interacting with them, that they're not kind of isolated and thinking too much, that they're still interacting together and with the coaches. So we do as much as we can. And I suppose I said to someone, if this had happened 15 years ago, we'd have been lost. It's social media now, and technology is brilliant. The fact that we can stay interacting together is really important.
Hey, so can you do me a favor and ask Oliver how he's doing? I always like to hear from Oliver. And
yeah, Ollie, how are you doing?
I'm fine. No positives, no negatives. Just existing.
Even keel. Yeah. How's the transition, Darren, been to coaching now? Still at a young enough age, I'm sure you could be playing. Probably had offers as well, but you made the choice to start coaching. How's that been for you?
been easy. I think about 2 years ago, or it's probably longer now, 2.5 years ago, I picked up a couple of injuries that I couldn't quite recover from, and I was picking up injuries I wouldn't have usually, muscular injuries. I made a couple of calls to people I know in the game that are well experienced and I would trust, and I kind of came up with a plan to prolong my career as long as possible. And I had a way of doing that, but I quickly found out I couldn't get to the level I wanted to get to anymore. And I was also I'd coached for the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. I've coached alongside playing, and I was starting to look forward to the session I was coaching rather than participating in, which was really alien to me. I loved training, I loved playing, but I started to enjoy that side of the game more. So the transition was easy. I did have offers to play on, and some good ones. But I started to realise probably the hardest bit of it was admitting to myself that I wanted to stop. I think every footballer, you know how kind of blessed you are to play the sport that you think, play as long as I can. That's the phrase I hear it all the time. Play as long as you can. You're a long time retired. Well, I figured out I wasn't the same, and that was probably the hardest part. But the transition's been easy and something I'd planned a long time in my head, so it wasn't something that just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Darren, we've talked pretty, I wouldn't say frequently, but we've talked fairly often compared to the other players I've covered in my career. And I know there was at one point you were potentially going to come back to TFC or even thinking about it. I'm not sure if you had read an offer to get back to Toronto. I know you visit here occasionally. Any interest in the CPL ever before you decided to go a different route? Was there any talks to try and get back to Canada through the new Canadian League?
Yeah. I spoke to Jimmy Brennan, who was at, forgive me, I don't know, was he at York at the time? This was when it was just kind of coming into their first season.
York 9.
That's right. That wasn't something that was close to getting done, but it was a conversation that was had. And then between the USL and the Canadian Premier League, there was talks that I was potentially going to look to come out and keep playing, but combining it with some sort of coaching role, whether that had been at the club I was playing at or another club around the place. So yeah, there was possibilities of that. I wouldn't say it was ever very close to happening, but it was something I was considering. But it would have been very much to play and combine coaching as well.
Was that your intention to play and coach, or was that what the clubs wanted?
Yeah, I think for me to move my family across the world again when I was on the way down, on the decline, it wasn't something I was going to do for 5, 6, 7 years. Obviously, my first stint in Toronto was only a year, but the plan was to be there for the long term. So there had to be a purpose for me going there that was the long term. I knew I wasn't going to play for 5, 6 more years, but if there was an incentive that there was a long-term option there, that would have been through coaching. So that kind of was the thinking behind that. And I probably claimed closer to going to the USL than I did the Canadian Premier League, but the Canadian Premier League was one I was kind of keen on looking at because obviously of my time in Toronto. And
since you've enjoyed coaching full-time now with the youth team at Celtic, would coming back to North America for a full-time coaching position be something you're interested in?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it wouldn't be, or I wouldn't say it would be. One thing I'm clear on is I want to be a manager one day, but I had options to go into first team coaching roles when I was retiring, and it was something I wasn't keen on doing. I don't see I know we've spoken about the word transition from playing to coaching. I don't see it as a natural transition at all. It's completely different. It's a completely different job as such, but people think naturally because you've played at a certain level you'll be a coach. It's far from the truth. So I wanted to learn. I suppose, be in an environment where I'm in the perfect environment now. I'm learning. I'm wanting to progress. I'm wanting to get better, and so are all the players. So we kind of match each other. And one day I want to be a manager and coach, certainly at the top level. But that's going to be a long journey, the same way as playing would be.
Yeah, one of the things we've discussed on these Hangouts over the last few weeks is the makeup of a player in North America compared to the makeup of a player in Europe. Kurt's brought this up a number of times. Kurt, specifically, what are the differences that we've discovered in watching players and talking to people on the Hangout?
Yeah, it's a hard one for me, right? Because you're lumping a lot of kids and potential professionals together, and even professionals. But it's not me just saying this, right? We've had Paul Stalteri on recently, who talked about the training environment and how it differs from Germany to now in the CPO, and where he's an assistant coach at York 9. We've talked to Dylan Sacramento recently, Darren, who's actually just moved to Galway to play there, and he's talked about the difference between the training environments and just how the level of intensity in a lot of these European leagues and among players fighting for positions is just different than it is, say, in Major League Soccer or the USL or the CPL. I was just looking for your comment, Darren, on why you think that is, and was that your experience when you came to TFC? Was there a level of intensity that was missing? What did you see when you came over here? Is that true?
Yeah, there's truth. There's truth in some of it. Probably the biggest thing or contributing factor to it is the college system. I had a guy. So when I signed for Toronto, I was 25 years old, and in the papers, yourself or whoever it was would have called me a veteran. Yes, there was a guy coming out of college that was maybe 18 months younger than me and was seen as a rookie. Now I was sitting in a dressing room alongside guys for my whole career that had fought and scratched their way up the ladder and had gone through tough times. Had probably come from difficult backgrounds at times, and football was their way out. I sat beside in the Toronto dressing room, who some of them are still my friends to this day, who were qualified in an accountant. I remember talking about doing my tax returns with someone and said, "Who do you get to do it?" And he was like, "No, I'm a qualified accountant. I can do it." And I was thinking, in Britain, you would never get that. That's absolutely outrageous because these boys would have left school at 15, 16 years old, which, by the way, I'm not saying either one's right or wrong, but that would have been a big difference. So the level of intensity probably comes from the word desperation, I suppose. Boys, I left home at 15, moved from which is bonkers really, but I moved from Ireland to Scotland with a family that I'd never met, moved in. I had to become a footballer or I'd have gone home a failure with no education. These guys don't actually have to, because, and talking about financially in the league, they'll probably earn more money if they come out of the game than they will in the game. Completely different in Britain. You will become a multimillionaire if you hit the top, not necessarily in the MLS. I'm talking about for coming out of college. So that was probably a reason for it. There was a completely different culture, if you like, but that is maybe down to societies rather than football.
Oliver and Asa. I mean, do you agree with me that part of this comes from me watching the new Jordan documentary too? But is there a commitment to greatness among young teens in this country who are soccer players? Like, is there that same commitment to greatness that you would see in a South American kid or in a Mexican kid?
Well, I don't know if it's that. I think Darren has a good point where there's not necessarily the same kind of peak for a North American player, for the ordinary North American player, in terms of the rewards, the fame, that he's going to get from playing football compared to a European player. There's a lot of young soccer players in this country. I don't see them filling up the parks. No, and I'd say as well, like there's a reason a few of us in this chat moved to Canada, right? It's a very nice country, a very nice place to live, and maybe players don't quite push themselves in the same way as if they're coming from a tougher background where they're trying to get out of. I don't know. It's like you said, it's one of those things we've discussed with a few people now, and it is a really interesting topic. I don't know if I have a full answer for it yet.
Yeah, I think the circumstances are different. There's a level of comfort, but I think if you asked any of the kids right now, 15, 16 years old, they say that they want it. They say that they are putting in the time. I think that there is a level of hunger there, but there's also that comfort and probably that fallback.
We'll never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't question their hunger or their appetite for it. That wasn't the kind of point. It was more, certainly at the professional level, when someone comes through a college system, they're arriving into a level of football that I was looking at them going, "You're similar age to me. Yeah, I've been through the mill already. I've gone and experienced 150, 200 games. where you'll only do that by the time you're 27, 28. But I wouldn't have questioned their work ethic or anything close to that. I thought there was a clear work ethic, different in culture massively, and intensity. I would argue that's just a cultural thing. I wouldn't have said I trained any harder in a European country than I did in Toronto. I trained at the same level. It was just probably how people treated each other was different. And as you said, Oliver, probably treated each other better in Canada than in Europe. So that's a cultural thing rather than a football thing, I think.
Do you treat the reporters in Europe better than you treated me?
I saved my best for you, Kurt.
Well, what was your experience like coming up through the system, Darren? Because you were a pretty famous youth club in Ireland, Home Farmers, produced a lot of good players, and then obviously Celtic. Was there a kind of a degree of adversity and pressure, particularly at Celtic, that maybe made you a better player?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to my original point. Like, I left home, so people talk now. I speak to the younger players now, and what makes you tick. Everyone's different. Everyone has different ways that, I don't want to say motivate them, but whatever makes them go. And talking about Kurt's going, watching The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, it's fascinating what makes him tick, what made him tick. What made me tick was failure. I didn't want to go home. So if I had arrived back and my friends, I'd have been known as the guy who basically was been sent home. That was a big thing for me. Was I just wanted to stay away from Ireland because that meant I would have made a career. Now, as I kind of went on, obviously I had bigger aspirations than just not being a failure. But a big thing for me was, so the pressure of going to Celtic. Obviously Celtic are a hugely supported club in Ireland, so everyone knew in certainly my area and who I was and where I was going, and there would have been eyes on me. There was a lot of kind of small media coverage anytime I did anything. So yeah, it probably did help a lot. And then talking about when you go then on into your career, these experiences you have as a young kid, then things became easier to handle because you've dealt with pressure essentially from a very, very young age.
Yeah.
Darren, I have my own Glasgow story I can share with you right now. I was actually over there recently, got to tour Ibrox first, follow that up with touring Celtic Park, and I got to say I like the former a little bit better. Thought it was a little bit nicer, a little fancier, a little more shiny. The tour guide was a little nicer, but I did get to go to Celtic Park for a Europa League game, and what struck me was the engagement and even the level of frustration of the fans in there. When they went down, I think they went down 2-0 to Salzburg, and guy in front of me 20 minutes in got up, started cursing the players, and walked out to applause in the stands. What's it like? What's it like over there? And what's the atmosphere? What can you describe that? Just, playing in that city and playing for that club, and the I guess the relationship with the supporters.
Yeah, well, one thing that's I wouldn't say unique, because there is certain clubs in the world that have it, but you're talking about that intensity for the 90 minutes. It's like that for your life, because you talk about losing that game when you go out into the street, or you go for a bit of dinner or shopping, wherever it may be, that result will get brought up by people in the street. So you have to live with it. You have to learn to live with it. It's a massive, I wouldn't say problem, but bridge you have to cross with younger players now. Is how do you prepare a player that when he misplaces a pass that 60,000 people are going to be on his back, and they're his own supporters. It has a flip side to it, that when things are going well, everything is as good as you can ever get at Celtic. But you have to be able to handle that pressure. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I go to obviously a lot of the home games, and especially European games, when there's a lot of pressure and anxiety probably in the stadium. You have to learn to live with it. There's probably no way of doing it other than when you're thrown in the deep end and you just find out someone's character there and then. So very, very difficult, very difficult. And when you're in a stadium with 5,000 people and you make a bad pass, 5,000 people groaning is quite loud. But when 60,000 groan, it's enormous. And it does. You hear it and it affects you, but it's how you handle it.
I think it was Izagirre that day that was getting heckled by the most supporters.
But there you go, and he's been heckled in one particular game. He'd be known as a a massive success at Celtic.
Yeah, they were on top of him then.
That's just the way.
That crowd can carry you though as well, right? Like you look back at some of the famous nights, like Barcelona, for example, and you were involved in a pretty amazing tie against Milan, where you took them to the very last minute. What's it like playing in one of those games at that stadium?
That's the part. That's why people want to be Celtic players. It's exceptional. You hear, I think the best quotes you'll get are from Xavi and Iniesta talking and saying Celtic Park is the best atmosphere they played in. It's electric. So it's kind of it's a I think part of it is the league in Scotland, because Celtic are so dominant. All of a sudden they turn into underdogs at times, and it's a completely different feel in the stadium. Then on the night time, the lights are on, playing against some of the biggest teams in the world. The fans seem to take to it massively, and it just creates an incredible atmosphere. But it really, really, you're right. The fans can carry you, absolutely. But then the flip side, there is moments in games or periods in seasons where you're having a tough time. You need to be able to handle them. So it can be a real positive. I would look at it as a real positive, but it's tougher to handle as well.
Yeah. And what's it like, Darren, playing in one of the greatest rivalries in the game, especially being from Dublin and representing Celtic, going up against Rangers? What's that like for you personally?
Yeah, it's probably something we were taught as kids coming through the academy, that you play maybe 40 games in a season, but you'll get judged off the European ones and the ones against Rangers. So there's a handful of games that matter, because you're expected to kind of win the other ones. It's funny, I hear a lot of kind of youth coaches now, and something obviously we talk about, communication with players and speaking to each other and helping each other. The Rangers games are the flip side of that. When you go onto the pitch, you're on your own, because you can't hear your teammate 10, 15 feet from you. You can't communicate. So then it becomes even more apparent. And that's something we learned when we were kids coming through the academy, was you actually need to know your role. You need to know your teammate's role. You need to know exactly what you're meant to be doing, because once you step onto the pitch, the noise is deafening. And a lot of games, big games you're involved in, usually it starts at 100 mile an hour and dies down as the game goes. There's no respite in these games. They go for 90 minutes. Everything's contested. The crowd are constantly at a knife edge. So it's fantastic. It is unique. I think that fixture is as good as you'll see is for atmosphere and for real. I suppose there is hatred in it at times. The more you can keep that out, the better. But certainly the atmosphere is electric and fantastic to play in.
And those two clubs, two strongest clubs in the Scottish Premier League. When you talk about super leagues, those are the two that get brought up. Darren, would you like to see a super league and potentially those two teams in it?
No, probably not. Probably not. No. I think in context, I've grown up in Scottish football and playing against Scottish teams. I think it's probably, to talk about that would be disrespectful to the quality of team in Scotland. I probably wouldn't. I think it would be fantastic for a year, probably, or 2 years, when you see giants go against each other, and it would be unique and it'd be something. But I think you'd lose a lot of it's authentic Scottish football, English football, Canadian football, whatever it is. I think you'd lose a lot of that. I like watching European football, of course I do. Champions League football is fantastic, but I think to see that week on week, I think you'd lose a lot. So it's not something I would probably like to see. But who knows?
What about just a larger, Premier League? That's talked about occasionally, isn't it? Over there with
it's been talked about for about 20 years, I think.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Over to
it's happening right now. So there's obviously a lot going on with every league, but Scottish League, there's actual ongoing talks about reconstructing the leagues, and that's probably the biggest topic, is extending the Premier League to more teams. Now, the problem is Scotland are basically governed by the clubs. So every club has a vote, essentially. So the ones in the Premier League probably won't be that keen on it, because there might be more relegation places in it. There's less games against the so-called big teams, Celtic Rangers, who fill out your stadiums. But yet the teams below the Premier League will obviously vote for it. So it's trying to get a balance. But I'll kind of put my neck on the line, say I'd be surprised if there isn't reconstruction after coronavirus.
What about the idea of Celtic and Rangers going into the English system? Because I guess that's similar to the Super League idea. I wonder what kind of state that would leave the rest of Scottish football in if you remove those big crowds and the appeal of Celtic and Rangers?
I don't know, and I don't think it'll ever happen.
Yeah.
I don't think it ever should happen.
Shouldn't.
No. Listen, if Celtic and Rangers were named England, the scope for the even more growth would be enormous, like absolutely enormous. But don't see it happening, and I don't. I think it would be disrespectful to the Scottish League to think they should. The Scottish League is, I don't know how many years it's been around, but there's a fantastic product here that needs to improve and looks to improve, as any kind of league does. But no, I don't ever see that happening. Certainly not in the near future. Anyway.
One of the reasons we wanted to get your opinion on that is because there's talk in North America of a potential merger between MLS and Liga MX one day, and what that would look like. And I think it goes without saying that would just leave Canadian professional football behind, right? So it'd be bad for the game in a lot of places.
But that was one thing. MLS was very, very forward thinking. It's different. It's newer as well. Then there's a lot. I certainly felt you could talk in a lot more detail than me, but in Britain, it's about tradition. It's about a lot more tradition, and there's been ways for hundreds of years, and this is the way it is. And by the way, that's more a compliment to MLS, that they're probably always looking for ways to evolve. I would say Britain isn't looking so much to evolve all that much in terms of different ideas like that. Those kind of really big ideas. I think people are set in their ways a little bit, and I don't think there's a right or wrong either way. But certainly from my time in MLS, it was completely different than what I was used to, and it took me a while probably to get used to it. But once I did, I saw how fantastic the league was, and the ideas they have are a little bit out there sometimes, but that's how you evolve sometimes, is with crazy ideas.
Yeah, Darren, what drew you to it? You come to Toronto, really entering the prime of your career. Why did you join MLS?
It was funny. I was away in the European Championships with Ireland at the time, in Ukraine and Poland, and I'd run out of contract, and Celtic had an option to keep me, but we'd agreed together. I asked to basically leave. I'd been on loan the year previously to that. So my agent was bringing me stuff, the usual stuff a kind of British-based player would get, and from different clubs, and I kind of was very indecisive, and eventually asked, well, what do you want? Because a lot of the deals he was bringing were probably as good as I was going to get. And Toronto came up and just said, look, come out for 3 days. So I suppose I had nothing to lose to come out for 3 days. But I'll be honest, I came out for 3 days. It was a nice flight out, nice hotel, good food. I had no intention of signing.
Who took you out that first night?
No intention of signing.
Paul Mariner took me out with the squad, and that was probably one of the. It was crazy. He brought me out to was it Earl's? I think it was.
Earl's, yeah.
Anyway, we went in, and Paul collected me from the hotel. We went to get. I thought was going to be a very formal dinner. Knowing Paul, I think he's known well enough. It wasn't formal, but I think 8 of the squad ended up showing up. So Thorsten Frings came, Danny Koevermans, Terry Dunfield was there. So they all came and sat, and we never ate. We just had a few beers together. My wife was there. We had a chat, and I think they all took a turn to try convince me to come. It was like they were kind of half kind of trying to sell it to me, but
yeah.
Brilliant. It was brilliant. It was what a night. I woke up the next day thinking that was mental. I went in then to the training ground next day and just saw the whole. I fell in love with the place basically after 3 days, and I got the itch, and I thought, I want to do this. It's completely different playoffs. And I thought, very well, there's something I can do. Now, I never obviously did it, but I knew Toronto were going to get there. Now, so that was a big thing for me coming from Celtic. I knew I wasn't maybe going to go to a club. I certainly wasn't going to go to a club in England that was going to win a league, because top 4 teams in England, I certainly wasn't going there. So I wanted something with a purpose, and Toronto was a city I saw with huge potential, a team with huge potential. And all we had to do was, I thought it was easier than it certainly turned out to be, but qualify for the playoffs. How hard can it be? You should be a squad with the infrastructure. Toronto should be in the playoffs every year, and the fact that they'd never been probably appealed to me more than anything.
What did you kind of find was going wrong at CFC while you were there? Because obviously it was pretty tough 2 years for the team. Before you got there, there'd been the whole Koevermans calling them the worst team in the world and that business. What was missing there? Because there were some good players in the squad.
I can tell you what was missing, Oliver Platt.
I'll let Kurt go first if you want.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, this is a team that, Darren, I think you left midway through 2013, right? But I mean, they won. I think they won 2 of their first 20 games in that season, right? I mean, this is a team where you look back, there were some talented players, but there were an awful lot of bad players on that squad too. So,
yeah, I could comment on the players. I couldn't comment on the ins and outs of who was bringing them in, but certainly in the time I spent there, I signed towards the end of the previous season with Paul, and I was very much told, look, I think Toronto were bottom of the kind of conference. There was obviously no hope of playoffs or anything like that. So I was told, look, use the 3 months to acclimatise, find your way, and then when next season comes, we're going to make a kind of a bigger push. So I kind of used the first 3 months to do that. There was kind of ups or downs, but results weren't really a problem because we weren't going anywhere anyway. And then kind of in the off season, obviously the off season was very long, and it was an off season I spent a lot of time training, and I was really looking forward to coming back. And I think I might be wrong, but it was maybe a month before we came back, Paul left, and not only Paul left, but Kevin Payne came in, and then Ryan Nelson followed him. And I came back, and obviously you're coming back to, you've been kind of told by a lot of people that you're kind of going to acclimatise and then we're going to start. But the people that told me that were gone by the time I was meant to even start. So kind of we were resetting again, and you were trying to find your feet again. And Ryan Nelson, really good guy, good coach, but a horrific decision to bring him in. He was playing in the Premier League. So, and I don't want to kind of talk about, sound like I've kind of an ego or whatever, but I'm a player that's come over and my manager's away back playing in a Premier League game, and I'm in pre-season and I'm thinking, what's going on? Like, this is crazy. And listen, great guy, absolutely brilliant guy, but I'm thinking I'm meant to be at the start of a project here that's going to move the whole club forward. And I properly bought into it. I still do. I still follow Toronto massively, but I was really, really passionate about doing it. And I thought, right, this is a bad start. Kevin Payne, another guy who I ended up getting on really well with, but I had a kind of coming to with early doors, was when he came into the press and criticised how the players came back and the conditioning of the players. Now, I can tell you now, the players came back in brilliant condition. Eric Hasley came back in a different condition to the rest of us. And he criticised the whole squad. So I ended up, off the back of that, had a row with Kevin. I think I pulled you up, Kurt. I think first day in Florida, there was a day I think I had a go at you for talking about players. But that was, in fairness to you, that was more me getting used to the culture of commenting on players on trial. I think you were commenting on players on trial, which I didn't.
I was going to get to that. I was going to get to that. I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I was going to get to that because I actually credit you, Darren, with teaching me a lesson that day, believe it or not. And I was a young reporter. Then. I think we were probably about the same age, actually. I kind of realized that you're going to be held accountable for what you write about people. And I think when you're a young sports journalist, you kind of think, well, I'm going to say whatever I want to. But I credit you that day for actually coming over and standing up for your teammates. And I probably was a little bit out of line, talking about how I thought how poor some of the players were training because they were younger players, right? So I always respected you for that.
No, I appreciate that. You were right. And I probably agree with you. But I felt, at that stage, I felt kind of like I hadn't been named captain or anything like that, but I felt kind of I had a duty to kind of protect people a little bit. It was probably something I did anyway. But anyway, kind of going back to the original point, was there was a lot of change, and then when I was meant to be starting a project that thought, right, we're all going to move forward. There was so much. I quickly found out that that season was getting called a transition year. And that Ryan Nelson spoke in the press at times talking about he was bedding in his ideas, which he was, don't get me wrong, and he coached the team well, but it was another transition year where he was trying to move certain players out to bring other players in, and he saw cultural problems, which I have to say I agreed with. But I was thinking, no, hold on a minute. As you say, I was in my prime. I was coming there to play and to achieve something. And all of a sudden, I'd wasted 3 months acclimatizing, and they were telling me now this is another season. So straight away, but saying that sounds like I was constantly unhappy. I loved it. I loved it.
We know you love. We know you love to hear. But another question for me would be: if I remember properly, I mean, your move was kind of sold as, yes, he's come over, he's helped change the culture, he's doing a good job for us, but he's just making too much money, so we got to get him out. I mean, did you appreciate how that kind of got out there as we're going to move this player on because we don't agree with how much we're paying him?
Yeah, but obviously I signed a contract with previous staff, previous members of the club that weren't there anymore. And I won't go into it because I don't even know where it sits. But put it this way, I can guarantee you, see, if I wanted to sit out my contract, I could have. I had a contract there that I was on good money. I was happy. My family were happy. So when the first person to get hit with that was Richard Eckersley, if you remember.
Yeah.
Now, Richard was in a different position than me. Good guy, good player. I think everyone would agree was on too much money.
Have you seen what he's doing now?
Yeah, follow him on Instagram, but I don't speak to him. But he's out in the woods, living out in the woods.
Yeah, look it up. He's happy.
Yeah, well, that's all that matters. No, I follow him and his wife, so no, they seem happy. But he was the first. Now, the minute that happened with Richard, I agreed with it, and I started to understand contracts. You need to understand, when I signed my contract, I was used to being in an environment where you got told what you were being paid, and that was it. And it didn't matter to the squad or whoever you could. So I started to learn a bit more. And when that happened with Richard, I was thinking, I'll be honest, I knew myself. I was thinking, well, surely you'll have a conversation with me, because I knew what I was on, and I knew in terms of the value I had to the team, I was on too much money. But that conversation never came until it was a good way. We played a number of games before the conversation. So I sat with Kevin Payne one day and Ryan Nelson, and they actually, I think they were, I don't want to say they were nervous, but I could tell they were thinking, they didn't know what reaction they'd get with me. And I actually said to them, I've been waiting for this chat for ages. I knew it was coming. I knew I had to come. I don't know, I think it was the allocation money they were using or so. I actually genuinely don't really understand it all. But I did understand I was earning too much in terms of the salary cap and all that. So
if I remember properly, we were a lot of us in the press were a bit confused when I think it was an away trip to Kansas City, and all of a sudden your name doesn't show up on the team sheet, and everybody's trying to find out where were you already in the Ukraine by then?
No, I landed in Kansas City. I was in the hotel, and then
okay.
Literally when I landed, I had a call that came that was the deal was done, and I had to fly. I literally was in the hotel. I had to fly straight back and then straight out to Ukraine. I think I flew out from, my whole family flew into Toronto, and I mean whole family, extended family, for 2 weeks. And I arrived back in to my condo, and they literally arrived, and I said, I'm away. That's me away. So it was strange how it was done, but I knew it was coming. And I had a decision. The only bit that riled me a little bit, but I didn't want to speak about at the time, was Toronto made it seem like I had to either accept a cut or they'd have to let me go, where that wasn't the case. I could have stayed there, had a long contract. But in fairness to Kevin Payne and Ryan Nelson, they actually offered me a very lengthy contract. It was just with severely cut wages, which obviously we didn't agree on. And there was no negotiation either. It wasn't, I didn't come back and say, look, if you get to this amount or this amount, I just said, look, I'll go then. I knew it was a case I either stay and kind of hurt the team a little bit by my wages, or go. And I thought, right, I'll go. And I had options to go as well. In hindsight, I'd have probably stayed, because I ended up traveling a bit. I was so content there. I was so happy. I'd have stayed. I'd have found a way to stay. But things happened, and it moved.
Just 2 more years, and Javinko would have been there to help you.
I know. That would have been a pleasure. No, but listen, and that showed obviously Kevin Payne moved on, and then Ryan Nelson moved on. And that was, come back to the original question, that was one of the main issues, was there was no stability. There was no stability in the playing squad. But above the playing squad, there was none. And the minute they got stability and I don't want to say proper people in, because that's unfair in the people before, but people in with a clear vision. You saw how quickly the franchise then moved on, or sorry, the team certainly moved on, and have done fantastically well since then.
Well, you moved on to Ukraine, and you also had a spell in India later in your career as well. Generally, British and Irish players, not to stereotype too much, but they're not known for traveling abroad. What appealed to you about going to those different places in your career?
Toronto was probably myself and my wife, we went on loan down to England from Scotland, and couldn't settle. We didn't settle. We moved to Toronto, which is across the world, and settled unbelievably well. And that just opened up my eyes. And I'll be honest, I probably knew. I don't know if my mind works 24/7, and I'm always plotting something in my head. I'm always thinking of different things, and probably too much at times. But I used to think, I'm not going to win anything. I'm not going to win a league. I'm certainly not going to win a top league. So I may as well travel and see the world and get different experiences. And don't get me wrong, financially earn money. And going into coaching now, that's probably the biggest thing I take into coaching now is the amount of different countries and cultures and methods I saw has been a massive tool to me. So in all honesty, Toronto opened my eyes up to the world. I was probably you're saying you're maybe unfair, being stereotypical on Irish English footballers. Absolutely not. We live in a bubble, and when I went to the MLS at first, I thought a lot of stuff was wrong, and when I left, I thought it was fantastic but it took me time to open my eyes up to realise, no, there's another way of doing this. One being the media coming into a dressing room straight after a game, mental to me. Thought it was completely wrong. The media being at training sessions, I really didn't enjoy. Still didn't really enjoy that, to be honest with you.
I've always been surprised about that. I mean, I've always said the number of international signings who come to Major League Soccer and are unaware of the media responsibilities. Do they just not warn you guys? What is it about that? Because it's pretty clear if you watch other leagues, the NBA, the NFL, which I know are on in the UK, that it's pretty obvious the level of scrutiny that players take in the locker room, right? So, do they not warn international signings about this?
I don't know. I don't know if I was warned. I think I'd watched enough of American sport to know of North American sport.
So weird though. Yeah.
Certainly, the training one was the one that got to me. Was the media been in the training sessions, and there was one day in particular. I actually think it was Jonathan Osorio. We trained one day, and I booted him up in the air out of anger, and I'm thinking, but there's media there to watch it. But this was late on in a session where I was used to being the media were given maybe 1 day access, and it was for the first 15, 20 minutes just to take a few pictures and get out, where media were constantly around the place. And there's actually a YouTube, it's on YouTube, an interview I did after one of the many home defeats that we had when I was there. But it's something I looked back and thought, it was after that I watched it actually, and since then I've watched it back. I was absolutely seething with anger, and I'm kind of speaking the way I'm speaking. I'm basically not in a good place. So it leaves you open to a lot of, when you're coming from that background of not being in that environment, it leaves you open to hurting. And Danny Koofman's the biggest one, worst team. Did he say that? It must have been post-match. That when Danny
Koofman it was post-match. It was post-match.
Wasn't he injured at the time though?
Oh, was he?
I don't know. It was during that 9-game losing streak at the start of 2012.
I wasn't there, but I've heard about it.
Before we get to your international career playing for Ireland, Darren, quick, reflection on your time in India. There for just 9 games, but a bit of research showed me that you did play against Ian Hume, former Canadian international, in one game, a 4-1 loss to Atletico de Calcutta for you. Do you remember that game? Do you remember going up against Ian Hume and just the level of play in India?
Yeah, first of all, when you say 9 games, it sounds like I was that was the league. The league was 14 games long. Ian was actually, certainly when I was there, I don't know what he's doing now. Is he still out there playing? Ian?
No, he's actually coming to Southern Ontario to do some coaching here soon.
Good. Ian was probably certainly one of the top strikers in the league in terms of goals. Anyway, he was seen there as he was thought of very, very highly there. The game, I don't really remember all that much playing against Ian. We had loads of our own internal problems. We had Nicholas and Elka as our manager, which was interesting enough. But in the standard of play is what it is. It's a new league. It's probably a new sport in a lot of ways to the country. Fantastic people, lovely people, real good intentions, but the level of football is absolutely nowhere near certainly MLS standard. Obviously the environment you play in is different as well. So it was, listen, the standard wasn't great. There was some very, very good players though, and Ian was certainly thought of in that way. I think he scored a lot of goals out there. He did very well. I think if I'm right, he's done quite well.
Yeah, he did. Now you're playing for your country, representing Ireland 20 times. What are some of your fondest memories of playing for your country?
Probably, and this sounds dead cliche, but probably all of them. Because for me, that was the pinnacle. I wasn't, some people maybe hit certain heights. I was lucky in my career, hit heights at Celtic, winning leagues and cups that, trust me, mean a lot to me. But playing for my country always meant the most. So all of them, obviously qualifying for Euro 2012, I was named Young International Player of the Year, albeit I think I was 24 at the time. I think we just had an aging squad. I was the youngest one. But yeah, I had loads of good times. The people I met, the level of player I got to play with, and call teammates, just everything about it. Represent your country to me is the biggest honour you can get, regardless of what it's in. Every in any sport. So I loved going away, and not, Toronto is probably a good example of that. When I was with Toronto, at times I knew I wasn't going to go away and play. Probably had decisions to make. Some players probably wouldn't have travelled, but I always went, because for me to go, and even if it was play 10 minutes, it would have been worth it for the full trip. So it'd be hard to really put down one fixture. Obviously, there's a couple of fixtures in there that were special results and stuff, and fixtures. But in all honesty, I loved it all. I loved Ireland. I'd have never not gone. Put it that way.
Do you think playing abroad and maybe not being in the sights of whoever was the manager at the time as much as you might be in England, for example, do you think that cost you a few caps in the end?
Yeah. So when I went to Toronto, obviously Giovanni Trapattoni was the manager. I was embedded in the squad. It was very much I wasn't waiting on squads getting announced to see was I in it. I'd been in it for 4 years, or 3 or 4 years. I'd obviously, as I said, got Young International Player of the Year. I'd played over half the qualifying games for that. And yeah, when I went to, he obviously, when I ended up going to Ukraine, a new manager came, and that was me. I never played again. And I can't blame anyone for that. That's just the way it was. I was completely out of the eyes of him. But in Ukraine, I peaked as a footballer. I got physically, and I'm talking about, compared to Toronto, Ukraine just had a completely different way of training. And probably the fact that I was had no social life, had no life whatsoever. I was living in a hotel at times. All I had was training. I ended up in a physically better condition than even I was at Celtic. So probably that was one of my frustrations, was I was probably at my peak then, and no one ever knew it, because no one watched Ukrainian football, and certainly the Irish manager wasn't watching it either. So a bit disappointing but it wasn't anyone's fault. That was just the way it was.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's changed at all? Just the perception of players playing abroad. Do you think that that continues, or do you think that's changed?
Yeah, I think it has changed. I think, certainly in Irish terms, Robbie Keane obviously playing at the Galaxy, and then he came back and still showed he was a seriously talented footballer still, and that could play at the top level. I think players, and as Oliver said, I think players, certainly British-based players, don't naturally travel, but I think you're now starting to see a couple of them starting to. Jordan Sancho is moved abroad, which is that is unusual. I think it's a great move, and clearly is coming up as a great move. I think England is such a diverse league now that the top players from and the money there, the top players from the world are coming there. That maybe younger players have to go abroad, or players in the middle of career have to go abroad to keep playing. So I think it's more. I don't think the thought process has changed. I think it's just going to get enforced more and more. I think leagues are becoming more diverse and far more multicultural. So I think that'll naturally just happen.
I got to get this one in because my dad's an Ipswich fan and he's already been texting me over the past half hour or so. So I got to ask you what it was like to play under Roy Keane. Is he everything that's advertised on the outside?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, but there's more to him than that. That's what I would say. So there's no point in sitting here and saying Roy's not a tough guy that can lose his rag at times, because he is. But I always found him dead simple. And that makes sense. I thought if you did your job and you worked to your ability and you didn't muck about, he'd be absolutely fine with you. There was never very many issues with him. You kind of just got on with your work. I think he did have values. He still has values because you listen to him on the TV. He values and principles, and he very much from a working background and didn't like the glitz and glamour of football. He liked people that dedicated their life to it, and probably couldn't accept other people. I think there was an interview he did the other day talking about Rooney and Ferdinand. He couldn't take to them because they had other interests than football, and maybe their banter was different. He was single-minded, but as a manager, he was modern. He was modern. He had simple expectations of the team. He didn't demand any more than what he should. There was never a moment I was with him that I thought he thinks he's at Man United here. He was realistic in what he thought. He did have a sharp tongue, a very, very sharp tongue. I'll give him that, which I don't think anyone needs me to tell them that. But as a manager, I think it's very much dramatised a little bit. And I don't care what anyone says. I think he plays up to it a little bit now in the media. I think he knows that's his way. He'd never admit to that, but I think he knows, and I find him entertaining to watch now. But as a manager, he was just as usual as anyone else. He demanded the same things. There wasn't anything that different than other managers. I've seen other managers lose their cool just as much as Roy Keane, put it that way.
Yeah.
In a recent podcast, Darren, you mentioned that you're studying specific traits in youth players who succeed and transitioning to the next level and making the first team. What are those traits specifically that lead to success?
I'm studying it. Yeah.
You let us know as soon as you do.
No. My kind of thinking was more, well, I suppose it could go over the whole just youth team football, but it was Celtic youth team football, because you hear I keep hearing the same things, that it doesn't matter how talented you are, and this is taught me even for first team players. When you come to Celtic, the kind of environment we're talking about that you're in is unique a little bit, that it takes more than just your physical attributes, your technical attributes. So that's something I was more kind of looking into. So I had a theory, and this is kind of where this studying is coming from, that probably in the last 15 years, certainly in my lifetime, since I came through the academy, into the first team, and every player since then, everyone I can think of had similar traits in terms of their character. Not in all different in terms of positions, sizes, speed, their physical attributes, technical, tactical, all that was different, but they'd similar characteristics in terms of their own character and their personality. So that was something then that probably gets overlooked a bit, and it's probably hard to coach as well. But that's something we've employed in the club and academy sports psychologists now. It's a massive part of the game, massive part at the level of Celtics at. So that's where it comes. But at the minute, I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it. I would like to kind of come back with tangible evidence that we can say, if you don't have these certain characteristics, you're going to really, really struggle. And right. That's more a study to sell to the players, that they understand what it takes to get there. And obviously that's my job.
Yeah, sports psychology.
It's refreshing to hear that. It's refreshing to hear that. I'm to listen to all these analytics people all the time and try to talk about the modern game. So it's refreshing to hear that, Darren.
Well, when play does return, tactics will be heavily involved. A recent report has indicated that FIFA is proposing up to 5 substitutions per match on a temporary basis for when play does return. So that's one thing that's being discussed. Darren, what are your thoughts on something like that being implemented?
If there's short-term procedures put in to help us come back out of COVID-19, then absolutely fine. We're going to have to find our way out and navigate our way out. No one knows the answer, and I'm all open or all ears and to whatever that may be. And if it's have more substitutions because for instance, if a league has to resume and they've been dormant for 6-8 weeks, and then they have to go back and play, and they're talking about playing every 2 days or every 3 days, then maybe having more substitutions helps injury prevention, that type of thing.
Right.
I'm not keen on having long-term solutions because of this problem. So any long-term solution should be for the better of the game, and they should be made when you're in a calmer waters, put it that way. Where I don't like the thought of having to change things because of the situation we're in now. So if FIFA are bringing this forward because they think it's the best for the game, and this was something that was maybe going to get implemented anyway further down the line, fine. But not. I'm not kind of, and that's something in Scotland has been discussed now, short term and long term.
Right.
Kind of changes. I'm not big on long term changes if it's purely just to get out of a tough situation. I think in life you wouldn't do that, so why would we do it in football?
Exactly. That's exactly what we need, Asa and Oliver. We need the last 10 minutes of the game to feature 7 substitutes. That's exactly what we need.
Well, I read that it would be 3 windows to make the substitutions, including the halftime window to make substitutions.
That was one of my solutions. I was going to say then allow a certain number of substitutes by halftime, and then maybe 3 total in the second half for each team or something.
Yeah. I think you just see like if Liverpool are 3-0 up, they're just going to take Mane, Salah, and Firmino off at halftime and rest them, right? Like I'm skeptical about like extensions to extra substitutions. I don't think teams really need more substitutions. Maybe you guys.
How about this? If you feel like your guys need a rest, then take them out, put in some reserves to start the game. Give your younger players a chance to play.
That could be a positive thing of like having a congested fixture list if there is one, is that you have to use your squad more, and that means more opportunities for young players, right?
I think that particular idea is coming from the fact of players are going to be maybe overloaded with games, and there's a worry of their physical health. But we know fine well that if you relate that to a preseason game, it works brilliantly well because you rotate the players and there's no talk. The minute results come into it, it'll be manipulated, like you say. And you're talking about having 3 windows, which makes sense to have just 3 windows you can substitute. The board goes up, so each substitution, they say, takes 30 seconds. There's tactical stuff that goes on in the game. When a player knows he's coming off the pitch, he runs to the other side of the pitch. That can happen twice. The board going up, you'll take minutes off the game. So I would agree in the long term, no. But if it means coming out of this and they're saying, look, for the until we finish a season for the next 9 games, we're going to do this for injury prevention, so be it. I don't mind that, but no, I'm not in for long-term solutions for a short-term problem.
Yeah. Well, this has been a blast, Darren. We're just about out of time, but we want to get your best Ukraine story from your short time there. Anything stand out, craziest Ukraine story?
I've told the same stories over and over again.
If you're new to me, let's hear it.
The main one was we went down. I've told this story that many times. Been slagged for telling it that many times as well. We went down. So the civil war obviously kicked off in Russia and Ukraine, and we travelled to a game down in Crimea, which is the south of Ukraine, and the airspace was closed at the time, so we had to drive. Now, people talk about poverty, and India was another country with that. Ukraine didn't have motorways. Like you were driving on a single lane track with potholes down. It was a 10-hour drive. So we drove on, and again, the minibus, it was a minibus we were on. It wasn't a big fancy bus. So drove down. I think we must have drove for 6-7 hours, arrived down to and it was a fake border. Now bear in mind, Crimea was a Ukrainian province. It was a fake border Russian army had set up and said Crimea had been overtaken by Russia, that we needed visas to get in. Obviously, we were going to a Premier League match, Ukrainian Premier League match. So we were at this border for, I think it was 4 or 5 hours. They wouldn't let us over. The Russian embassy was involved. Our directors are obviously making phone calls, our president, and we needed the toilet. There was no toilet. And we spotted a toilet in a porta cabin across from the bus. So me and 4 of the guys jumped off and walked over. And as we were walking halfway over, we'd 4 or 5 Russian army soldiers running at us, balaclavas on, machine guns up, screaming. I mean, sprinting, gun up. So put it this way, I didn't need the toilet after they finished. So obviously speaking Russian, I didn't have a great grasp of Russian at the time. Obviously weren't allowing us leave the bus. That was the whole thing. They wanted us on the bus. I don't know where they thought we were going, but we ended up getting escorted to the toilet. We were watched through the toilet with the guns up, escorted back to the bus. Eventually got over the border, played the game the next day, and then got back out. And we'd similar problems actually getting out of the country as well. Or say get out of the country, out of the place. So it was mental. That was the moment I thought I was in Toronto a few months ago. What have I done with my life? What have I done? But there was many of them. Many times I was in hotels. I lived in a hotel, and many times I get phone calls saying, "Look, don't go out for dinner tonight. Don't go out." They call them protests. But the next day you'd read the news and there'd be 5 people killed in the protests. And when I'm saying these things were happening less than a mile from my hotel. So actually the hotel I stayed in when I left, Shakhtar Donetsk stadium was on the same site as the hotel, 500 feet from the hotel. That got hit with a missile. So that kind of tells you what kind of environment you were in, it's just mental, crazy times.
Well, thank you so much for coming on with us and sharing some of those stories. Darren, we'll have to do this again. I'm sure you have plenty more to tell. For Kurt Larson, Oliver Platt, I'm Asa Raymond. Be sure to check out all of the other shows on our OneSoccer YouTube channel. Later tonight, Gareth Wheeler goes inside the game with Jim Brennan. Darren's good buddy, so that should be interesting as well. Thanks again. Stay inside and subscribe to the OneSoccer YouTube channel. See ya.